Hi there, welcome to Bible/Chat. Jason, sometimes we get questions that are fun, and then
Yes.
sometimes we get a whole bunch of random little questions, right?
They are weird questions, but people have them.
Yeah, which is good actually. and we
I've
want
had
to
them
address
too.
them.
You know,
Yeah.
and like it's good to like figure all this stuff out.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, or try to.
Try, yeah.
I don't know. Okay, so the question, this one, I was asked by someone a couple of times was, what about dinosaurs?
Okay.
Does the Bible talk about them?
Yeah,
And if, what happened to them?
yeah,
How come they're all gone?
yeah.
Or are they all gone?
This is a really good. Yeah, it's a very tricky
Yeah.
question. Lots to be said there, but
Yeah.
I think if we start with just what the Bible says about dinosaurs,
Yeah, go ahead.
briefly.
Yeah.
In the book of Job, we were just talking about this before we started this video.
Yeah.
So, in the book of Job, chapter 40, verse 15, Job talks about, God talks about an animal called the behemoth.
Yep.
Right? Verse 15 says, "Behold now." So he tells Job, hey, go look at this giant animal, right? It's called a behemoth. He says, which I made as well as you. So I made you, Job. I also made this giant living creature. He eats grass like an ox. So we know he's a vegetarian, right? A vegetarian animal. Behold now, his strength is in his loins, and so he has huge legs, and his power in the muscles of his belly. So a giant belly, some kind of a massive beast, right?
Yes.
And you say, well, that sounds a lot like a hippo, right? They eat grass and they have strong legs.
It's actually the NAS margin note. Mine says, or the hippopotamus for behemoth.
Right, I know, yeah. So people say, like, oh, maybe it's a hippo.
Yeah, maybe.
The problem with that interpretation is verse 17.
Right.
It says, he bends his tail like a cedar. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a hippo, but their tails are like, very short, just,
Yeah.
you know,
Not much
it's like
going
a
on
windshield
there.
wiper. Exactly. So this thing has a massive tail, big enough to call it a cedar tree, which is a huge tree in the Middle
massive,
East. So
yeah.
huge tail,
Yeah.
massive things. And it says the sinews of his thighs are knit together, massive muscles. His bones are like tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. Massive, huge animal, right?
Yeah.
That description sounds like a what? Like a giant
Brontosaurus.
Yeah, it is a brontosaurus, like a giant grass-eating huge animal, dinosaur.
With a massive tail.
Massive tail.
Yeah.
So you got this huge animal there, and then in chapter 41 you have Leviathan, right? And he says, can you pull Leviathan with a fish hook or press down his tongue with a cord? In other words, can you pull this fish even out of the water? It's so huge. There's some kind of an animal in the sea that is such a huge animal that you can't pull him out of the sea. If you look down in verse 10, it says, "No one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him." So he says, you can't even, you don't even get close to this thing, it will kill you, right? So you have a massive animal, some kind of a massive sea-dwelling creature that's terrifying and huge. Yeah. So you have a huge physical animal on land and then a huge sea-dwelling animal. So these two things, massive creatures. What are those? Well, I would argue that those probably are dinosaurs. I would take an early writing for the date of Job.
Yeah, very early.
Very early, pre-flood, I think. And so you have this very early writing for the date of Job. He predates the flood. Yep. And Job now God is describing these animals in the book of Job that are dinosaurs. Yeah. So those things existed before the flood, and I believe that they were created by God at the beginning of creation.
Of course.
They were spoken into existence. They're land mammals and sea creatures. Yeah. Not mammals, land reptiles sea creatures, right? And so you have these animals on the land, animals on the sea that are huge. They're dinosaurs. Then the flood comes. What happens with all these creatures, right? Well, they're gone. Yeah, they're essentially gone. Yeah. So two questions come up there. One is, why didn't Noah take two of them on the ark? And the second question is, where did they all go? Yeah. Right. So the first question we would say is, I think he did, but he took them in kinds. Yeah. There are still dinosaurs on the earth that exist. Yeah. And we see them. They're just smaller.
Like alligators.
Crocodiles.
Yeah. Right.
Relatively large size, large scale. Reptiles that still represent that category, that kind. Yeah. And so when we go back to the whole kinds issue, I believe that they're still represented by their kind. So where did all these giant reptiles go? And I think the answer is they were all killed in the flood. Right. The flood comes and they are killed. Even if Noah took two of the dinosaurs with him on the ark, those animals would still have died. And the reason for that, immediately after the flood, the reason for that is because before the flood, there was a canopy of water that covered the earth. The waters that are above, very explicitly says that in Genesis chapter 6, when this flood begins. And so
it does.
Those waters that were above fall down onto the earth.
Right.
And so that canopy, which protected the earth from UV radiation, is now on the earth. All that water's on the earth. It filters down into oceans. What happens to the earth? Well, it gets immeasurably cooler, right? You have the north and south poles, of which suddenly are much cooler. It's not like the greenhouse effect anymore. The earth isn't able to protect that way, and so A lot of the plant life dies.
Right.
You have large-scale motion of plant life into banks of dead plant life, and those become oil deposits, right? And then you have huge numbers of fossils. Now, this is where I think it's very clear that dinosaurs did exist, and to me, this is where you see this made so evident that they must have died in this way.
Yeah.
How do you get an animal the size of a brontosaurus to fossilize?
Exactly.
And to have that happen consistently?
Right.
Well, you have to bury that thing in a huge amount of sand
Very
very rapidly.
fast.
Because it'll decompose very quickly,
Of course.
right? So you have a huge creature which is buried in enough sand with enough pressure to fossilize that thing.
Yeah.
How are you going to get that much sand to move around and bury that thing? And I think the only answer is a flood. You have to have a global flood.
Yeah.
And you can say, well, it's just regional, small floods here and there, and moved around. I mean, you would have to assume like massive flooding in all sorts of regions, because you find fossils all over the planet.
Right.
So I think it just makes good logical sense to say that the flood killed off those animals. They were fossilized in huge numbers, and we find lots of fossils. Huge numbers of them fossilized very, very rapidly.
Yep.
And of course you'd have them in different strata, because the flood is moving water and moving sediment very, very quickly at massive quantities. And so when all that comes together, I think it makes sense. They existed, the flood comes, they die because of whether the change in temperature on the planet, or they died during the flood.
Right.
Either way, you have that solution.
Yeah.
And so they're just not around anymore, except that we see them in small animals that reflect that kind.
With crocodiles or Komodo dragons or
whatever,
whatever, something like that.
Large-scale lizards. Like for us, the things that are large-scale lizards. So,
exactly. So then, this probably will open up. I'm not going to even open up this whole can of.
Just
talk about Noah's flood. No. I mean, we could just
talk about the flood.
And then I think people want to talk about that whole young Earth, old Earth debate, and also going out to space, not just on the Earth.
Totally.
But the whole thing about the global flood, I mean, it says that the waters reached the top of Mount Ararat.
Yeah.
It's not a small mountain. I mean, no regional flood is going to do that for such a giant mountain.
Yeah.
And it says also, so that it says springs of the earth opened up.
Yeah.
So it's not just water coming down, right?
Yeah,
it was
totally.
water opening, gushing up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving just crazy amounts of movement that we can't even fathom.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult for us to even conceive of
how do we
huge
even think about that?
The cataclysmic nature of that. And also things like continental drift and plate tectonics and all that stuff. I mean, the surface of the earth changed. We know that, right? And essentially, prior to that time, there were no deep oceans in the same way that we think of them now. And those shifts took place in such a way that the continents drifted, and you have the reorientation of those things.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fascinating things in that. Like even we could do this in a whole.
No, I know, but you could wrap it up.
But even
with that.
the change in the polarity in the seabed of the Atlantic. You have polarity north, polarity south, polarity north, polarity south. You have those polarity changes. Well, how do you get that kind of polarity change with that kind of regularity? It's very, very interesting. And I think the only answer is massive movements that occur not only on the surface, but even the movement of the magma under the earth and all of that shifting.
Yeah.
It allows for those things to take place, as those things are spreading very, very rapidly.
Right.
Not slow. You get a slow thing like that, there's no way to get that kind of regularity and that kind of motion on a slow scale. So I think all that took place incredibly quickly. It was unbelievably cataclysmic.
It had to have been.
Yeah, and buried huge amounts of plant life and animal life, which then fossilized, and then we see those things now.
Well, when God judges anything, it's fast. It's
totally
violent. It's like an onrush of whatever it is. It's not like, all right, let's draw this out for. I mean, it was drawn out for 40 days and 40 nights, but it was 40 days and 40 nights of cataclysmic, fast horror. Through water.
Yeah, and even the argument, I think, to me, the argument with dinosaurs about the fossils being over long periods of time, I struggle with that, because that presumes uniformitarianism, right? It presumes that there haven't been cataclysmic
everything's always been the same.
Yeah, it's always been the same. Yeah. But now you have massive creatures that are fossilized, which requires hugely cataclysmic events to take place. So it's almost internally self-contradictory. I think it's easier to just say, hey, look, these things were, take the Bible at its word, say they did exist.
There was a world flood.
There was a world flood. They were buried rapidly, and that's why we have tons of fossils.
Yeah.
That's my take.
So, that's science.
Science,
God,
yes.
The Bible, what should I say? Science is supported, I don't want to say it the other way.
Yeah.
The Bible will always, what's the way to say it?
Eventually be supported by science. Yeah.
And when it's contradicting science, then what do we say?
Right.
The Bible's right. And that's a whole other
Exactly. That's a whole other discussion.
Sorry.
Yeah. No. Very helpful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Really good. Thank you. No,
well, I hope that's helpful for you.
So helpful.
We'll do some more on this this whole topic because it is very complex. Lots to talk about.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you so much. Hope that's helpful for you. Talk to you soon.